Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate I am the last session between you and the final keynote of the week. Just want to shout out to Maria and Nicola for making it a really great track. And hopefully I can complement the other sessions that have been on this track over the last few days. Slight disclaimer though, I am no longer in testing. I've been an engineering manager for quite a while. However, I spend my life advocating for testing and making sure we've got testing thought about in our processes and our practices and our techniques. And that's really what I'm going to talk about here. If you read a little bit more of the blurb, it will tell you that the amount of time is finite. So what I'm trying to do here is get involved early and make sure we take the opportunity and every opportunity we can in that short time frame to build quality into our products. And that's what we're looking at. Now, I say access points, but what do I mean? I don't know, and I am going to do a really bad pronunciation of this, but does anyone know of the Japanese puzzle boxes, Himitsu Bakoi? Now, they're absolutely beautiful, and I think testers in the room are probably thinking, we can do black box testing, we don't need to know what's inside. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that you don't even have access to do that kind of black box testing, because we haven't given people the opportunity to get into the box, to unearth its characteristics, to look at what it's doing. And that's what we're talking about in the systems that we're building today. So how can we create those opportunities to do the great work? Vernon Richards said it really well earlier in the week. Can you imagine changing the environment you're in just to do your job? And that's what I'm trying to get us to do. I'm trying to get us to make sure that we can do things that we need to do within the time frame we've got. Why does it matter? Now, we had Jitesh talking yesterday about complexity. Even if things are complicated, we're just adding to it at the moment. And I started out a very, very long time ago, and my life was pretty easy. It was doing C and C++ coding to test C and C++ compilers to generate ARM and Thumb that ran directly on semiconductor technology and chips at ARM. And yes, that sadly was over 25 years ago, which is a number I didn't expect to be saying. Now, that is not the type of technological landscape that we are working within today. It is getting more and more involved and complicated. And actually, a diagram that Jitesh showed about our infrastructure kind of thing, and we're looking at this tiny bit over here, actually came up on one of my Slack channels at work only this week for what we're working on. Along with that, hopefully, we're releasing faster. So again, maybe it's 6 monthly, weekly, minutely. However, that keeps shortening that time we've got in which to do our jobs. And I have a wonderful CTO who I work with, but having given him AI, unfortunately, he's a really, really productive CTO, along with his now friend AI becoming more productive. So people are actually building more in the amount of time they had. So the volume is increasing because actually people are force multiplying what they do day in and day out. And that's what we're working with. So because of all of this, we need to get these access points into these systems as well and best we can. Now, that does mean, favorite word, I'm talking about change. Sadly, we're not always ready for change. We don't always want change, and we certainly don't want it inflicted on us, but that's the reality. The only constant about change is change. And I'm afraid I don't know whose quote that is, but it's true, yeah? Change is happening. So what can we do to make this possible, and how can we make it work? And for those of you who know what I'm talking about designing for testability. How do we look at all of the systems around us and design them so they're testable? And I'm not talking about just the product. And yes, I did steal this from Google AI's overview of what they meant testability and software engineering version of it. I'm talking about every single process, activity. I was talking with Maria earlier. I was working on healthcare software for AstraZeneca, and they suddenly decided that they'd implemented it, and it was a doctor going to make a change. Later on, they decided that they would need to audit that change. Let's retrofit auditing every change that someone's made at any point through the software. We know that putting things in after the fact is harder. So again, normally we're quite good with functional things, but when it comes to non-functional things, we're not quite as good. So how can we design testability into our systems? So who's up for a bit of audience participation? Anyone want to tell me what's involved in building software? People, yeah, great one. Cooperation, yeah. Any tools? Yeah. I'm going to simplify this, but I agree with those answers that came up. People, process, code, data, tools. And these are some of the things we're going to talk about today. And it is going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour about some ideas that you can go back to your organisation and say, do you know what? We could try this. We could look at this. Maybe there's something more we can do here. So we'll start with the human process. Now, this is a very generic software development lifecycle diagram that I found on the internet. But ultimately, in your companies and organizations and your teams, you'll have different processes. But do you actually know what that process is? Does everybody know where and when decisions are being made? Hands up if you've ever worked on a piece of software where someone in product came up with an idea and you're just meant to implement it. No questions asked, yeah? Someone at least was with me on that one. It is one of those where there are decisions going on, and what we want to do is within that process, and you have to look at your own process because it's not one size fits all, what are those opportunities? Because I think Vernon had a lovely quote again where it said, if you're going to make decisions without me, don't expect me not to have an opinion about them later when I find out about them. Yeah? And I am a tester at heart. I'm a very opinionated person. One other disclaimer. What I have learned, especially over these last few days, I've been reminded of, Vernon talked about the authority gap. I am standing here from a position of privilege. As I said, I've been doing this for over 25 years. I'm a little bit confident that I know when and why I'm asking a question. And hopefully I know how to ask it in the right way. Elizabeth was talking about going on and saying, you didn't do that well. No, it's not going to work well if all we go back with is, well, you should have done it this way. No, we've got to do things in the right way to make sure we understand that. But I do have that privilege, and I work directly for the CEO of the company I'm at, which also gives me quite nice safety and a great relationship to be able to talk through things. However, what I want to do is empower anyone else to be able to do that. And also, for those of you who are not testers, maybe you're engineering managers, create allyship. Take the testers along with you. Invite them into those conversations, okay? Because that's what's still needed. So, as we look at the human process, again, some of you might be thinking, that's great, what's that got to do with me? But we need all of us to be working together on this. And for most of us, there is an aspect of Agile, or we're at least in the same company. So even if the hole's not at your end of the boat, you're still in the same boat. And that's what we're trying to look at today. But Joshua Korevsky spoke about this at the beginning of the week, and Jitesh was talking about this yesterday. Collective risk management or uncertainty reduction, it is a collaborative behavior. Person at the front mentioned cooperation. Now, people talk a lot about Amy Edmondson and psychological safety, and that is really important. This actual picture comes from Strategic Doing. And if you haven't read about Strategic Doing, I really recommend you do. It's a really great reminder of how you can run effective meetings and collaborations with lots of people and link and leverage those assets that you have at that meeting to do great things. It comes out of Purdue University originally, Ed Morrison, but the reason I brought this in is because we are talking about moving from coordinating and cooperating. We've got to get all the way to collaborating. Okay, this has to be done together. So kind of psychological safety is it's easy for us to say the phrase, it is very difficult to create, but it's something that's needed, because even if we invite people into these meetings and we create opportunities for them to have early engagement, they have to have the safety to feel that they can speak up, that they can ask the question. Okay? And again, as my little cartoon says, I'm only asking the question because I actually need to know the answer. It's very rare that someone goes, I just thought I'd throw it out there, didn't really care. But again, you've got to have that opportunity to ask the question and bring it in. So what's common in the human process aspect of it is generally our meetings that we run. So looking around and saying, well, who's represented at this meeting? Do we have all the people we need? Now, I'm not suggesting we always invite everybody, but do we have good diversity, cognitive diversity, good representation of the company, and that appreciation of how we're trying to bring things together? So I know I didn't go to Massin's talk just before now, but he was talking about test ops, development, testing, operations. Have we considered the whole gamut in which our product is supposed to be working? Have we got customers represented at those conversations? So again, and the reason I called out conversations is it's really easy, especially if you're working in a distributed environment, to forget to invite people because you can't see them. There's no longer that water cooler moment in the office where you go, sorry, what were you talking about? Can I just join in? And again, as I said, I'm confident enough, I'll invite myself to anything nowadays. But the reality is, if you can't see the conversations happening, you don't know about it, it is so much harder to actually understand what's going on. So even those informal conversations, just consider whether you've got the right people there to have that conversation. And it's okay to pause it and say, hold on a sec, let's just see if someone can join. Yeah? Now, we do go to some meetings and they're not appropriate for us, and there's a little bit of FOMO sometimes of, I should be in that meeting, I'm sure I should be in it. No, we don't need to go to all the meetings, but there are certain ones where we need to have those opportunities. I'm going to talk about a few and specific things we can do. So Simon Wardley talked about this, about kind of using visualizations. For me, a picture paints 1,000 words. Yeah, pictures are still really useful tools to use, whether you're online or in a physical meeting, doesn't matter. And there's multiple reasons why. Some of it is to divert the conversation away from people, so you can look at what's on the screen. The other one is, so in this example, someone puts up a design like this, and you go, wow, who designed that? Yeah, it is not the prettiest picture in the world. But what it does do is it changes the conversation. If I said to people, I want a modal dialogue so you can register for our application, off you go. Or I go, I want a modal dialogue so you can register for the application, and this is roughly what it should look like. We can have a much more detailed, different conversation about it. Okay? And again, it is bad. I designed it. I take complete onus, but it was illustrative. And it's one of those where, does it even make sense? Date of birth, DOB, is anyone going to understand it? Without this diagram, you wouldn't be able to have those conversations early. And there are many times when this can be useful. For example, if you've got a developer and a tester, they've got a diagram like this, which is at least looking like it should. The developer and tester can agree the IDs that are going to be used for the fields. They can then both go off, implement independently, potentially. One does the solution, one does the testing for the solution. They come back together. Now, a lot of people go, ooh, that's going to be merge conflicts. It will, quite possibly. But what that actually means is the interpretations of one person and the other interpretations actually come together, and they get questioned because there's a reason it doesn't work. My sister and I live quite close, get on really well, and she invited me several years ago to my niece's twin girl's birthday party. I was there at the right time, the right day, the wrong temporary ice rink near where we live. I went to the one nearest where I live, and they were at the one nearest where they live. Only 20 minutes apart, but I thought we'd walked away from the invite conversation perfectly well. Both knew exactly what was going on, okay? Have you ever had that? Walked away from a conversation going, yep, we're on the same page. Come back. No, not quite aligned in the same way. So this really is about getting to that point of shared understanding, alignment, ownership. And there are so many things that can be diagrammed, okay? I've called out a few here. Customer journey maps. Again, I don't know whether you use them in your organization. User story maps, process diagrams. And again, if you're a mapper like Simon Wardley next door, great opportunities. But it really is using those diagrams to continue to elicit the conversation and get those kind of internal, implied aspects being explicitly discussed as much as possible. And another oldie but goodie, like me. I still love this diagram. It still represents what we see all too often. And it's still happening because we are not on the same page, however much we think we are. So here's another example of a diagram. And again, whether this is part of the technical process or the human process, it depends. But really what I'm calling out here is if people are deciding how to build a system and what are going to be the data flows between parts of the system, or how those parts of the system are going to communicate in any shape, manner, or form, or potentially even what type of technology is being used in there. When you have a diagram like this, you help people go, there's going to be an API. I'm going to phone up Elizabeth and she's going to tell me how to test it. But it's one of those where it goes, right, well, okay, how can I get access to that API? Can I get access directly? Can we inject data into it? And again, I'm actually not just trying to make the testers' lives easy. I'm trying to make it easy for everybody to improve the quality in the system by shortening those feedback loops throughout the system, okay? Now, again, the other beauty of architectural diagrams is if you want to do security threat analysis, it really helps to actually have a diagram to understand what you're analysing and looking for threats in. So if you're going to do any threat modelling, and remember those non-functional requirements, it's really hard after the fact to bring them in. But if you've got diagrams, visualizations, you can also use them for those things nice and early on. And it might identify skills gaps, but it also might identify just gaps in the concept or facts that part of this system are not accessible. And therefore, it's going to be harder to get the feedback on them. Another thing, as I said, we're trying to remove ambiguity. We're trying to do uncertainty reduction. So another one I'm going to call out. Now, this is actually Matt Wynne who came up with example mapping, but great books by Gashper and Seb Rose. Humans are much better when we use examples. So it's about taking things like your requirements and trying to work out whether you are aligned and on the same page by sending examples through. Now, example mapping works by having a concept of a story, a set of rules, and then you've got examples that you can confirm or invalidate that meet those rules, okay? And by having the examples, you're illustrating that you truly do understand whether you have got the requirements right, and therefore it's going to satisfy the needs of the user. Okay, now Seb would very much recommend that you are doing example mapping sort of 30 minutes a day around the stories that you're working on, not big, long sessions. And it might not take 30 minutes. It's little and often keeping up with what you're doing. But ultimately, using examples to actually show your interpretation of what's going on. Okay, now, this is a lovely, simple example. They get a lot more complex than this, but it is just illustrative of what you can do when you offer a wrong example and someone goes, oh, no, that won't work, or, oh, what rule are you applying here? How does that change things? So again, here you're also giving that ability for everyone to look at how you're going to test it, but also understand the system. But you're also questioning whether you truly understand what someone's going to do with it, how they're going to use it, and why. Now, over the years, I've realised that not a great communicator, however much I'd like to think I am. So I do spend quite a lot of time. I'm a lover of books. I obviously haven't quite modernised myself, so I'm a real bookworm still. But these are some examples of books that when you're trying to gain access to something, you've got to do it in the right way. But also, when you have got access and you're going to be in those conversations, there is a way that you can ask things which is more likely to get a response. So again, Elizabeth said this earlier, tell me more. Yeah, it's a really great way of just having that active listening going on yourself and trying to understand. And I pulled out this quote from Humble Inquiry from Ed Schein. The fine art of drawing someone out, of asking questions to which you do not know the answer, of building a relationship based on curiosity and interest in the other person. I love that. And again, Jitesh talked about this, curiosity. Curiosity in our systems is one of our key attributes that can really help us in this journey of trying to find access points. And of course, empathy. Empathizing with the people we're talking to and working with, but also for the users that are being represented and meant to be using our systems. So I do think that's an important side of it. Moving on to the technical process. Now, again, it's just a version of a technical process. Yours might be different. But within the technical process, it's trying to work out how people have that access and what can be done in the technical process to get feedback. So again, really common for people to say, well, we need to get the automated testing in there. That's great. Yeah, get those things in. And again, this is when we start to have conversations about, well, how are we going to deploy it? Or how are we going to know what's going on? So one of the key things here is if at the end of you running your builds pipeline, no one knows how many tests there were, whether they passed, they can't see from one build execution to the next the state of the system, they're not getting that access to the information. So when it comes to technical process, it's the ability to actually put tests into that process, but also to get the information out of the process. And a lot of times you'll find that testers, some of them are very technical, of course, but some of them aren't, and they don't know how to create these systems. Okay? They might know what they need, but they might need counterparts around the organization to make it happen, and also to make testing and visibility of information and data a first-class citizen within those processes. We've got environments as well. So I've worked across very different sectors, but one of the ones I was in, you have to actually walk down to a physical machine with software to put it on a physical machine to actually find out what's going on. Going all the way to the production environment to get information back has a rather long lead time. So again, what can people do? So where I am right now, the developers create a branch and deploy it pretty much immediately as soon as they start working on something, which means that anybody can dip into that deployment and see the state of it. Now, they know it's not finished, and they're not trying to go, yes, it's production ready and it's great, but they can get access to it really early and really easily. The one thing that goes along with the environments is how have you set up your environments? How have you made it accessible to people? What sort of barriers are there to go through these environments? I'm going to move to the next slide because these two, for me, are very tightly coupled, and it's something we struggle with at the moment. When you get into an environment, that's great. But you need the right data, the right setup, the right configuration within that environment. So again, we struggled to release last week because we found an issue in staging that we didn't find in development because we didn't have the data of staging and development. So again, do you have production data or patterns of it that you can replicate in those earlier environments? Can you allow people to actually insert, do an action, look at the state of it, restore, try it again. A lot of products nowadays are data-driven, and again, the volume of data is just increasing, so that ability to recreate and put the right data in the right environments is absolutely key for people to be able to access and create scenarios. The last one I mentioned here is also synthetic versus real data. So previous company, I was working on a benchtop cell analysis machine, and it's basically a big camera taking pictures of cells. That's wonderful. You do an experiment, it takes pictures of the cells, that's great. How do we create one where we just kindly ask the cells to separate partway through the experiment for us? Could you just, could you go a little bit further apart? Could you go right to the edge of the cell just so we can't see you in the cell membrane? It's not going to work, funnily enough. They're not very compliant cells. So then you've got to look at synthetic data. How can you generate those extremes, those error conditions? And again, it's not just testers who need this data. If we're building anything, we want this data when we're building it to make sure we're building it the right way and to handle the right things. Now, I talked about having psychological safety and allowing people to come in and have those conversations. Sometimes you're also possibly going to have to think outside the box, try new things. And again, it takes time, doesn't it? Someone comes up with a great idea and you just go, nah, we've not tried it. Or the other one, the opposite is this, tried that 2 years ago, didn't work, not doing it again. I feel like our industry is changing from morning to afternoon on a regular basis. So things are changing. We can try things again. But what can we do? So again, it's not one size fits all, but I have seen over the years applications with no logging or no concept of logging levels. So something goes wrong. Brilliant. Did we log it? No. Right, okay. Now, what do we do? Oh, just hope it doesn't happen again. That's, of course, one option. But ultimately, if we do not have the information, it's not there. And beyond just logging what's happened, brilliant stack trace, really useful. Do we know anything more about what was going on? Vernon was talking about a race engineer who came up and went, well, it's 100 degrees heat where I'm standing with a really low lo-fi iPad or whatever, doing my job. Yeah, what do we know about the environment? What are we actually capturing? What's the load on the system at the time? What's the temperature inside the device? Whatever it might be. But what do we know? And how can we make sure you've got the right information? And even more for me, one of the things I've requested over the years was, can we change the logging level while the thing is running? Because I only really want to see a little snippet. It's going wrong, or I want to start at this point, move it on. But we need to build these things in. Yeah, they're not just afterthoughts. Yeah, you know that bug that happened 2 weeks ago? Could we just go back and add logging? Yeah, we need them built into the system so we can use them when we need to get there. Test mode is one that feature flags. You might use feature flag as a test mode, it's possible, but putting things into a test mode so you get more information out, allowing testers to input things in a test mode or create a command line interface version of an application that has a front-end UI. All of these things are allowing people to access things without the overhead. And yes, it is not testing the exact thing a user's going to get, but that's not the point of it. It is creating access for people to do things easily and in the right way. But you have to build them into your system. Same with remote debugging. Have you ever run something and gone, if I could just attach a debugger now, I could find out what's going on? Now again, you need to build that into your applications or run in debug mode permanently for a while, etc. But these considerations all have to be made when you're going, how are we going to build this? What are we going to do? Yeah? How are we going to design this application for testability so people can access it at the right way, at the right time? Now, this is my sweet spot. I did start out in the hardware software, and again, last company was hardware software as well. I absolutely love the hardware and software when they come together. But as I said, last company, if you took your software, went down to the physical machine and made sure no one else was on it, got on the physical machine, put the new version of the software, then you ran an experiment for 4 to 6 potentially hours, or even overnight, that is not the easiest feedback loop in understanding whether the software that fixed one tiny little line is working perfectly, okay? So what we're looking at here is, again, remote debugging, of course. If you actually get into a problem down there, if you can attach a debugger to the system and understand what's going on, that's always great. Potentially putting additional sensors into a system. How can you learn more about the system? Or, fortunate enough, we created a simulated version of it. So again, when I started out at Arm, I had my little farm of semiconductor chips, but I also had a simulated version. And there's multiple reasons why simulators are good. No, they're not the real thing. You do actually still have to run it on the real thing at some point. But how many physical devices do you have access to versus everyone having access to a simulated one? Yeah? Simulators and digital twins, there are similarities. A simulator is a static one-point-in-time state of that replica, whereas digital twins are real-time data going back and forth. So again, at AstraZeneca, we were building digital twins of the supply chain for drug manufacturing. Having those means that you can actually enter partway through and do a simulated scenario within them. But again, if you're in hardware, you know more about this, but it really is a case of, again, you're designing for testability. You're making it so that you can get that feedback from the systems earlier on. I did say this was a whistle-stop tour. Just going to come back to users and the people. Now, one thing people often don't have access to is users. So you can create access to users, but users, they're your ingress point. They are the people getting into your system, using your applications. So understanding them is really important, but also that is your access point. As a tester, you're supposed to be a user. If you never see a user, you've never spoken to a user, funnily enough, it's pretty difficult to empathize with them and replicate them. So with the users, it's knowing what you can do, but also, I talk here about shifting right. You don't hear that often in testing, but there is no real replica for an actual person who is going to use it and hasn't been involved in the process and can give you honest feedback because they don't have that skin in the game in the same way, yeah? So again, bringing users actually in, giving access to real users to software. Okay, and that user could be someone inside your organization, customer success, people like that. But it is one where you've got to understand the users. And sometimes in certain systems, users aren't obvious, actually. You really have to work out who they are. And if you can't exactly work out who they are, it's a proxy for them. And there are often hidden users of your system. Yeah, we focus on the user, the customer, and then there's some poor sysadmin who's behind the scenes going, yep, just enabled it for that customer. Yep. Now the next. Now the next. Yeah, we do need to kind of appreciate all of the stakeholders and users of our system. So one of the things which is a key theme about this, it's visibility. Without visibility, without making problems visible, without making systems visible, processes visible, we can't work out what information we're missing or whether we're able to get into those parts of the system. So by doing this and creating that visibility, it can be about anything. It could be, and again, I am going to use this, let's say you want code coverage. Now, I'm not saying you want 100% code coverage, and I'm not saying that all green tests are great, because I've seen green tests that test nothing. Yeah, it's been done. But what I am saying is if you have no visibility into the system, you can't even determine how it's being used. What telemetry and observability do you have about its use in production? Or how do you spot things that you're not looking for? Yeah, we're very good at going, I ran into an exception. What about the hidden exception that's hiding in the logs that no one's actually looking through? Yeah. There is lots of information. Now, the difficulty with this is once we've captured all this information and data, we have to actually do something with it. And there's very little point in capturing information if you don't intend to use it. But really what we're looking at is building visibility into these systems. So again, you can have the right conversations. You can know, actually, no users on between 1 and 2 in the lunchtime. Brilliant. That's our update window. You know, there is a lot you can glean from this information, but you have to design it. Now, I'm going to come back to us as individuals, and some of these are oldies but goodies, but there is a newer one from Mark Wintringham, and apologies, the graphics aren't great on that one. But we need to look at ourselves as well. So again, we can get access, that's fine, but if we don't actually know the domain, if we don't have the skills to do the job, having access doesn't actually help us. So all I'm saying here is always be open to learning. Every day is a school day for me. Sadly, it's about school minutes some of the time, but it's one of those where you really are trying to make sure that you're keeping your skills up to date and driving forward for when you've got access, or using this information to co-educate other people with you. Yeah. For me, it really is that symbiotic relationship within an organisation for that collective improvements that we can make and that quality that we can build in. So I'm going to pause for 1 minute here. I just hope you can take a minute. Yeah, got that. What could you go back to your organisation with? Is there one area where you could say, we could have a conversation about that? So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to think about what would be a takeaway, what's something you can action back at your organisation. There's times in my life where I found a minute feels really long. In a plank is one of them. This would be another one. And I cut it a little bit short. But again, this is the whistle-stop tour of things that you can do, and there's so much more you can do, but you have to be looking for it. So what I'm asking really is for you to look at those opportunities and make sure, as I say, you're either an ally for someone who needs that access into the systems, you're taking advantage of access, you're asking for it, or you're creating ways for people to have the right conversations. Here's a few more references. I do spend my life going up and down between people and engineering. So someone reminded me about clean architecture the other day, so I'm rereading that. Very early on, it says, if you don't build your systems well up front, you're in trouble later. Kind of the irony of that. And also, at the moment, I'm sadly realizing that however I think I'm evolving as a human being, I've got a very long way to go. So Dolly Chugh is educating me on that. And I'm really, again, very grateful for those of you who came today. And this is what you might get inside your Japanese puzzle box. But again, if we don't have access, we won't even be able to open any parts of it. So thank you very much. I have got 1 minute if anyone wants to ask a question, but I will offer to stand here, and if anyone wants to speak to me, I'll pop over to the speakers lounge afterwards, but otherwise, enjoy the keynote, and thank you very much.